Hello and welcome to the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club. I'm Marlo Artist. The Tar Heel Teachers Book Club is our monthly opportunity to discuss great books. Each month, I'm happily joined by a wonderful panel of North Carolina educators who love dissecting great text. We'll start our introductions with our friend from Carteret County.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Golightly, and I'm a K-5 media coordinator at Newport Elementary School, and I'm also the North Carolina Reading Association Vice President. You can find me on Twitter at Emily Golightly3.
Hello, I'm Kelly Poquette, the 2021 Burroughs Welcome Fund Piedmont Triad Region Teacher of the Year and a K-5 music educator at the Alamance Virtual School in Alamance County. And I would love to connect with you on Twitter. I'm at KA Poquette.
Hey everyone, I'm Pamela Sands. I'm a former media coordinator and a current digital learning facilitator in Cumberland County, and I am the two-time North Carolina School Library Media Association's Media Coordinator of the Year. You can find me on Twitter at LivingPamtastic.
Hi, I'm Amy Tart. I teach fourth grade ELA and social studies for Clinton City Schools, and you can find me on Twitter at Cards for Scholars.
Awesome. Our January 2022 Tar Heel Teachers Book Club selection is Hearts Unbroken by Cynthia Leitich Smith, New York Times bestselling author. Be sure to share your thoughts on Twitter by using our hashtag THT Book Club. Hearts Unbroken is a thoughtful story of a Native teen navigating the complicated, confusing waters of high school and first love. It's also a story of racism in small town America. Louise, our protagonist, she writes for the school newspaper, and her younger brother Huey, who earned the title and the role of Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, they're the recipients of hate speech when the musical's director uses inclusive casting. Hearts Unbroken is the 2020 winner of the American Indian Youth Literature Award. Where would we like to start with Hearts Unbroken?
All right, I'll jump in. I did not know about The Wizard of Oz and Frank Baum or L. Frank Baum. I didn't know, and I have a family member who, tattoos and like loves Wizard of Oz. Probably like me, has no idea, and it just made me so sad that something so like whimsical could come from someone so full of hate. That was. Oh, I'm glad I know. Like, I'm very glad I know now, and like this book educated me on that. But it was still like, man.
Yeah, it's the same way. I didn't realize it either. I really liked Louise. I think that a lot of it kind of resonated with me. Being from Western North Carolina, you do see a lot of microaggressions. I feel like even though it is, such an important part with we have the Cherokee Reservation nearby, but something that really stood out to me was in the beginning when Cam was, making the comments, and then he said, well, I'm part Native American, or I have this history way back. And that kind of really resonated with me, because I thought of like how many times I've heard like somebody say something that was racist, but they try to cover it up with an excuse. So I really liked how that was highlighted, and it really brought up how we see that a lot. And I'm glad that Louise was facing that head on.
Well, and I agree with your comment there because, she's still a teenager. And I think about how, there's so much pressure to do the right thing and handle every situation just right. But it's messy. And as a teen, especially, she's still figuring out how to navigate all of this and doesn't always handle every situation as perhaps she should or could have in hindsight. And I like that the book jumps right in and addresses that and shows, hey, we mess up. It's okay. Life is messy. But, it's what you do afterwards and how she handled that. I was proud of her and how she grew as a character.
I was not really surprised so much by the organization part that was fighting the casting in the play. I feel like today we see some of that too with the questions of our literature and, people going on attack when things aren't the way that they're accustomed to them being, and they don't fit within their own little snow globe of world. And so I thought it was good that was of course that was challenged, and that it got to continue with the diverse casting in the play in spite of that.
Mm-hmm. And kind of going with Kelly's part about not knowing the history, it's just something that keeps coming up when we have, whether it's an artist or just someone in the public eye who makes a really poor decision or says something that's racial, racially insensitive, racist, or just something that's really bad and people get canceled. Well, then the question that we constantly keep coming up is the artist versus the art. And so that came up throughout thinking about that. And Huey, her brother, had to really go through that. And I thought that was really because he had been cast as the Tin Man and he found out what happened. He thought that his mom should have told him because she had been studying American Indian studies. But what I liked about the mom, she let them navigate on their own. It wasn't, oh, well, you need to quit the play. You don't need to participate. He came to that decision on his own. And it's something that we all constantly keep encountering, whether it's Bill Cosby, are we going to watch the Cosby Show, or whoever, Harvey Weinstein, are we going to watch his movies? I mean, the art versus the artist, and understanding that artists have some complicated experiences and say things and do things that we don't agree with. And are we going to ban the art, or are we going to separate that from the artist? That's a personal decision that people have to make.
I gotta say, I really wondered if she chose him to be the Tin Man intentionally because of the heart piece. I mean, he had to follow his heart and make that decision. I thought, I don't feel like that was by accident. I want to ask her about that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. What did y'all think about the 9/11 scene with the teacher and like bringing that up? I was really impressed by that. I liked that chapter.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that was great. And, I have a high school daughter and she's come home talking about some of their civics discussions and how they can get very heated. And I appreciate the way these high school teachers aren't afraid to face issues head on and address it and not, just let somebody say something that's kind of out of the way and just let it slide like that. I mean, he kind of turned it on its side and made those kids have something more to think about with some of the comments that were being made. And, I think that's a hard thing to do in the time that we're living in, and it's getting harder and harder. And so to see anybody stand up and make people kind of consider a different perspective, I think that's really important.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
good
I
for
like
him
the
to.
point and he was like, get out your phone, like look it up. So kind of putting it back on the child. So I like that part of it.
Mm-hmm. About the domestic terrorism and really, the
Mhm.
realities of not having those stereotypes. But I'm sure that with him really causing him to think, I wonder if he got any pushback the way that Miss Wilson got the pushback, as way Mrs. Q received the pushback, and even Miss Zimmerman, the librarian, as well. These the Parents Against Revisionist Theater, and it's probably the same group of people that had an issue with the books, that had an issue with the
Mhm.
play. I mean, it's really something that teachers have to deal with. As I'm teaching the curriculum and really challenging my kids to think and make decisions for themselves, am I going to be held accountable, not receive any support, and am I at jeopardy of losing my job?
Well, and as librarians, Pam, you can probably speak to this too, but sometimes it falls into that self-censorship of what are you willing to say? How far are you willing to go to put things out there that deserve to be out there? But because of that fear of what's somebody going to say or what's someone going to think, or are they going to try and get that book banned,
I've been very fortunate to have been in places, and I don't know if it's, just my own discretion or but I've not really felt that I was going to get called to the carpet for my choices. But I did put a lot of thought and a lot of research into my choices when we put them in the library. And, I had reasons to back them up. So if I ever did get called to the carpet, like I was prepared to defend my stance, just like the theater teacher, was willing to defend what she was doing. And I want to go with what Emily was saying earlier too about looking at things from another perspective. I appreciated the discussion in her newspaper series that Lou was doing about sexual bullying too, and the way that we talk to each other and about each other as adolescents, and just bringing that to light and the things that people say.
Particularly how girls are talked about.
Yeah.
I mean, that I was so happy that that was highlighted, and even to another extent about girls of color being overly sexualized. I mean, really, I mean, Cynthia had a lot of things that are real and things that we need to think about and that happens in our society.
And I think too about how girls talk to each other too. Because I've had adult friends that have had the same kind of vocabulary that I won't repeat now towards each other, and it was just brushed off. But then I look at it, I'm like, why? Why would you say those types of things to each other and address each other in that fashion?
Yeah. And then play it off as like kidding around and joking, and then realizing, well, one of the friends, she wasn't laughing. And when she walked away and Louise was like, "You're not laughing." And she said, "No, I'm not." So I thought that was really powerful too, bringing up all of that.
And it's just
I was
so,
really, go ahead, Marla.
you know, what's really sad though, with girls is that the reputation will develop without any fact at all. So with Rebecca, you know, this was said because somebody had an issue that her dad was dating her mom, and so started spreading all these rumors about her. I mean, and it was very damaging. I mean, she lost babysitting jobs. You know, it had to be emotionally damaging as well, but it was financially devastating. And there was no proof, but they just kept going. And then whenever Cam broke up, well, whenever Lou broke up with Cam, then he also was spreading things about her. I don't think Cam was held accountable in the book because things were just like brushed aside, and he kind of became a hero at the end because you know he was gonna stand up for you. And I'm like, no, he said some really bad things, and it was never addressed, and he was never held accountable. That
And
really
I don't
bothered
think
me.
Lou responded like your typical, like a 17-year-old
Yeah.
girl would respond. If somebody was going around saying those things about me and they were, you know, not based on fact and tarnishing my reputation, like I'm not gonna be like, oh, well, I understand why he's saying those things. No, like I'm gonna be in your face and say, like, how dare you?
Pam,
At
I thought
least
the
try to
same
do some
thing.
kind of
Get it,
damage
Pam.
control.
The maturity level that I think especially Huey showed in this book as a freshman, I was like, man, if only I could have been that intelligent and that emotionally strong and mature at that age. That would have been very helpful. And I wondered why that was. I wonder if it was because they were so close to their family, because they participated in so many different events that really brought them back to their Native American heritage. I wondered if that is what it was. Was it because their parents kind of let them struggle and flounder a little bit and figure things out, but like be there when they needed them? But they just seemed to both be very mature.
Mhm, mhm.
Well, I think in some
Definitely.
instances they were really mature, but then Lou, the way she kind of was self-centered and didn't care about her friends, you know, it could go both ways. You know, you saw that teenagerness kind of jump out in moments, and it's like, oh, wait, there she is. That's a teenager for you.
Hmm. Cynthia, I heard she say in the interview that you know she really believed in having flawed characters, and you're absolutely right about Lou. She made me so upset with Shelby because she was so all about herself. Shelby spent her hard-earned money to take her to the spa for her birthday, and every conversation you're trying to make it about you, not really inquiring about her, and you think just because you wrote an article about teens working that you're some type of superhero. So that she was very flawed, and it was you know typical teenage things that we saw too. In addition to her being mature about other things.
Yeah, I like the flawed character aspect because I think it's even more relatable for those teens because I mean, they're not going to be perfect. Like Emily said, you know, yes, she's very mature in some ways, but then those teenager struggles come out. So I appreciate the flawed characters as well. But I don't know how she composed herself when she was interviewing the pastor's wife and she brought up her brother and she was able to just not say anything and keep the interview going. I would not have been able to contain myself in that moment.
Hmm. They were all professional on the newspaper staff, I would say.
Yes. Yes.
Let me just say, as a former journalism teacher and newspaper advisor, I loved my kids and they were fabulous. But in high school, I don't feel like that was very realistic either. And the things that they accomplished with the staff of like 5 of them, you know, or 6, I don't feel like that was really how that works in the real world.
I was wondering that, Pam, because like as a music teacher, you know, when you see people playing instruments on TV, you're like, no. So I was wondering if that was the same kind of way, like if that was really realistic about how a journalism class ran.
Yeah.
But did you read the section at the end where she kind of thanked her journalism teacher from high school and said how much he inspired this and all? So, I mean, I want, maybe she had like a really awesome, amazing journalism teacher. I don't know.
It's possible.
And I took journalism in high school too, and my experience there was not like that. But a lot of my high school experiences, I don't feel like mirrored this. So maybe she did like a great, very professional experience that led her.
Well, and they seem to be an affluent community too. So maybe they have resources that we didn't have in my high school. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, another thing about affluent communities, students are given a lot of autonomy and leeway to do things that don't happen in communities that don't have that affluence. So, you know, it's quite possible too that, you know, you're going to give them, because you just see them as more mature, you just treat them with more respect, because, you know, all that abundance in the community.
So one of my favorite things we talk about almost every book group is favorite characters. So I saw Amy's thinking about it. I love that thinking face. My favorite was Huey, like
Huey was great.
by far, for lots of different reasons. So I was curious what resonated with y'all.
I
My
take Huey
favorite
too,
was
and I like
Huey.
Shelby. Sorry, go ahead, Pam.
I was going to say I liked Huey and Shelby, and most of the time I really liked the theater teacher too.
Well, and I've got to be honest too. I love Huey, but y'all already took that one, so I'll go a little different direction. I loved her mom because I felt like all the mess that was going down in their neighborhood and the stress and the drama, and she was so even keeled while trying to get her degrees and all this. And I mean, she has a lot going on. God bless that woman, and she kept it together. She was a rock star.
I love the mom too, and I love that she was in law school after, you know, being a teacher. That's a good example for her daughter. And I also love that Lou said that her best feature was her brain, and I think that's really great for young girls to think that. Interesting characters. One of my favorite moments, I don't know if she's my favorite character because we didn't have enough about her, but I love that note that Mrs. Zimmerman wrote to Huey when she purchased that book for him. I thought that was so sweet. You know how I am about the teachers, and I'm like, oh, I love that was included.
I could totally see having more books with some of these characters and Huey growing up through high school and maybe having some more of that in there.
Mm-hmm.
The pastor's wife, I really wanted to come through the book. I was having a lot of issues with her, especially all the reverse racism comments. And I couldn't fathom it because the lead of Dorothy, you know, it went on about how great she was and, you know, her talent. And then to have that kind of taken away from her, it really bothered me. I was getting very upset.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad that Cynthia included that because, you know, a lot of people of color who are the first to do something always have to prove themselves over and over again because people may doubt their experiences, you know, think that, you know, you got it through affirmative action and you didn't earn it and those types of things. And Chelsea was very talented. Huey was very talented and the other cast members. So I'm glad that Cynthia included that particular piece. And it's so sad that it became such an issue that people were even writing these hate notes. I mean, to go through that and this is what you're doing because you're so upset that somebody's playing Dorothy in a high school musical.
And it stemmed from the church. This is the pastor's wife.
Well, and that bothered me too, because, you know, the wife, you know, she's evil. She is like painted into that easily, but the preacher, he was no hero, you know, I mean, after that little conversation he had with the other guy, he was, you know, oh, thank you for being such a strong Christian and this, that, and the other, but what's he really going to do? It's his wife and son, you know, they learned that from somewhere, and he's the head of a mega church, you know. What kind of example is he setting? There's a whole organization that's kind of pulling up out of that community that's agreeing with him. That comes from somewhere. And if it's not squashed, then it's condoned. If you don't say something about it, then you're agreeing with it by default, you know? And I think that the same thing happened with Daniel. when he sat by and waited until they were about to set their house on fire. Oh, I'll let you, paint their garage or whatever with vandalism and all that. But then he only stood up when it got extreme. He was condoning it too. They just waited until it got to a point where they had to step in.
Well, and I feel like that's a whole family who, like Marla said before, never had to atone for their actions. Like they never faced any consequences. The son didn't ever have to face any consequences for his actions, which were criminal. The wife didn't have to ever face up to all of the hate and the negativity that she had caused and stirred in the community. And the pastor, like none of them had any consequences for their actions. But I did have a question, Emily. I read that part with Daniel differently a little bit. I envision that as he had overheard that this was happening and was coming to stop it when he got there. Because he didn't want, not that like he drove him there and watched him paint the house and then said, hey, stop, that's enough. I thought it was more like he had overheard it and he was coming to stop, and that part had already happened when he got there.
How did
he drove them
together? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So to me, that's like, he's guilty as well,
And he never had to come up to any consequences for that either.
And I do appreciate that he recognized his error where some of them didn't, So, I mean, he grew throughout that situation, but that could have gone a really bad direction really quickly,
But did he only grow because Lou confronted him and pulled him to the side and they had the conversation? Was Daniel going to say anything about it if Lou didn't say anything? And while Peter was so drunk, you should have called the police or, to come get him while he was doing this stuff. It was a lot of bystanders in this book. When people were saying things and doing stuff, people were just like, this is not my problem. I'm not going to get involved.
That's what I was going to say. It was a lot of sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that's why I kept thinking in the book is it was a lot of like willful ignorance. Like they were choosing to be ignorant and turn a blind eye to it all.
Mm-hmm. And I was just going to say, in the back of my mind, I'm trying to think, how would a teenager really react? What's reasonable for us to expect of them when they're still kind of developing their brains and really impulsive too, So, I teach K-5. And so that's my world of experience other than my personal teenagers. So I've got a little bit of experience with that, but even still, I can't imagine that me as a teenager or my kids as a teenager would stand by and just watch these things happen without trying to do something, So that was hard for me.
Well, we do have to talk about the power aspect too. Because what about the fact that Emily couldn't write on about the story anymore because it was threatening her dad's business, because the individuals in the group were saying they weren't going to go to him as a florist. And then Daniel, the coach, even said if he continued to be on the journalism, the newspaper staff, then that he wouldn't be able to wrestle because it was impacting his son's construction business. So not only were they sending the hate mail and trying to intimidate, but they were also trying to use their power and privilege financially to shut people down, to squash it, to maintain more power. And it was really like disgusting.
Over a children's play, y'all. Seriously.
Yeah.
There's so many levels of fear and how fear was used in different ways in this book. And there were so many things that like made me angry, like Amy said about the preacher's wife. And there were other things that made me go, my word, I never thought about that. And I feel bad that I haven't thought about, like when they were at the race and there were people dressed up as Native Americans. And earlier in the book, she referenced something that was a headdress for like an award show, I think. I'm like, oh my word, that is completely and wholly inappropriate. But I never had thought about it before. And it was a little bit of an embarrassing, like I was reading the book by myself, right? But I was a little bit embarrassed of not getting that without having like a teenager kind of point it out to me.
Well, and I think you see it a lot with Indigenous people in sports teams, and you still see that. So at one of the districts in the Western North Carolina, it was just 2 years ago that they were playing Cherokee, and the students decided like their theme for the game was to be dressed up as cowboys because they were playing Cherokee. And I mean, so there's so much aggression, I feel like, that comes out when sports is involved and you have the mascots and things like that.
And I actually looked this up, and so the number of North Carolina schools using American Indian mascots dropped from 73 in 2002 to 36 in 2017, and that's across 22 school districts. So even in 2017, there was still 36, and we're still about close to that number now, maybe a few less. But what's interesting is that the State Board of Education actually released an action statement in 2002 and said, educate yourselves on the educational, curricular, and psychological effects of using American Indian sports mascots and logos. That was 20 years ago, and we have not abolished that. We still have over 30 schools that have it, and there's a school in Gaston County, South Park High School. They won't even address it. They have people who are protesting, who are offended by it. If a group tells you what you're doing is offensive, you need to take their word for it. Stop making about yourself and about your pride. And you should not have a human person as a mascot, especially at a school. I mean, it's really bad, even in 2022 here in North Carolina.
I know of places still where even at Thanksgiving, they're still dressing kids up as pilgrims and Indians, is what they'll say. And they do a little feast, and the kids don't really understand because they're 5 and 6 years old. And that's kind of starting from when they're little. That's training them up on how to think about these things,
Yeah, I specifically remember that being done with me in kindergarten. And I mean, it just really makes you think about, like you said, these are young kids, and that's already being put into their mindset. And then continue it on through high school with the sports teams.
And professional sports teams.
Yeah. And I think that, like, Lou was very, like, she was seeing it more throughout the book. Like, she was noticing things more, like the model on the TV, and then the Chiefs game, and then the different posters. So I think she became even more so aware throughout the book of all the different places in culture that you do see things like that. So I thought that was interesting how she grew as a character in that way.
Can I ask you all a question? I was a little bit confused about Lou not understanding that Joey knew that she was Native American.
I was confused about that too.
He knows who your brother is, and he knows that your brother is the Tin Man. Like, why do you think that he doesn't know that you're indigenous? That part I couldn't understand that.
I couldn't either.
Her whole conversation when she was trying to approach that with him, that was so, like, out of left field and weird. Like, I didn't understand, like, what approach she was trying to take. Yeah.
I think she was trying to be like, we both have shared experiences that are negative, but she didn't couch it right.
Yeah.
And it does sound like that was perhaps a real life occurrence, and that's what inspired the author to include that in the book, or to write a book about it.
I thought she said somewhere in there too, and I can't remember if I read this online or in the book, but that she looked or could pass as not necessarily Native. And so, whereas perhaps her brother, she did mention he had a darker skin tone and things like that. So maybe she really didn't think in her egocentric world that he figured out that she was Native. I thought it was interesting too that they didn't show her face on the cover. And I wonder if that had any piece of that. I would be interested to see, like, how the author perceives her as a character, like what she would look like if you could see that face.
And I would understand that if it wasn't like a big topic at the school about the brother specifically being a person of color in one of the main roles. I'm like, Joey's on the newspaper team, Lou. He's following what's happening. So that's why it was a little bit of a mismatch. I thought it was really, really sad, though, that they had to keep dealing with these bad notes and people just being so hateful. And at first they tried to ignore it, but, when stuff happens like that, some people just continue. And that's why it became even more egregious when they went to their house.
I was confused. I was surprised that they tried to ignore it. Like, I was expecting the mom to be like, oh, we're not taking this sitting down, but like, and I don't know if it comes from, like you said, the power behind it, but trying to ignore it at the beginning, I was like, you need to call them out. Like,
I think at the beginning they were trying to take the cues from the other families who were a little bit fearful about it. And so, I mean, that's why it's so complicated when you're dealing with situations where you might feel comfortable speaking out and speaking up, but then other people who might be associated with you may feel a little bit more, unable to speak up and feel like they don't have safety to do it. So I mean, it's so complicated, and I think Cynthia really did a good job of conveying that.
Well, and her dad was a business owner too. He was a local dentist. So maybe he was worried about having backlash on their family's livelihood, kind of like the florist situation.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts about the book? It was so many different pieces.
I did read a quote from, I'm trying to remember who said it. I think her name was Alexis on the Indigo Bookshelf or Indigo Book Club or something like that. She said something about how, if Cynthia as the author loved her people as a native group of people and as a generation, she said, maybe it means we can love ourselves too. And I thought that was really powerful. Like hearing how kids reacted to this that are in that demographic that she's writing about, it resonated. And so I appreciated that as someone looking at it, from an outside perspective. I'm not in that generation. And so for them to say, yeah, this is real, and she kind of hit the nail on the head, I thought that was awesome.
It is really great. Well, we're so glad that we were able to have a conversation about Hearts Unbroken by Cynthia Leitich Smith. And when we return, we'll be joined by the author and we'll ask her all these different questions and get more insight into how she developed this great story. We'll be right back. We are back on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club, and we're now being joined by Cynthia Leitich Smith, New York Times bestselling author of Hearts Unbroken. Cynthia, we are so grateful to have you on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club.
Mado, thank you. I am deeply honored to be here.
Really excited to chat with you. Really enjoy reading Hearts Unbroken. What a really powerful text that really caused us to do a lot of deep thinking and reflections. So I know that you poured some of your personal experiences into Hearts Unbroken. You have many things in common with Louise. I am curious though, what was the inspiration regarding the color conscious casting with the Wizard of Oz? How did all of that come about?
I was raised largely, not entirely, but largely in suburban Kansas. And in that environment, Oz is ever present. It permeates the popular culture. It's in every gift shop, every travel kiosk. There are bumper stickers that say Land of Oz. It's everywhere. And as a small child, I was first associated with the movie. And I had a deep fear of flying monkeys. Flying monkeys were bad. But, growing up, there were certainly little Oz ornaments on my bureau. And then as an adult, I encountered the editorials that were written by L. Frank Baum. And this was, somewhere in the early 00s, if you will. And I remember thinking at the time that it would be interesting to write a story from the point of view of Huey, who turned out to be Louise's little brother, that really centered on him and his experience in theater and encountering all of this. And while that was a very solid idea, sort of intrinsically, it was not the time that publishing was open to that sort of a concept. Back then, it was all I could do to publish contemporary works centered on Indigenous people at all. Mm-hmm. And, I remember very clearly Uma Krishnaswamy, my dear friend, who's a children's author, saying to me, the world is going to change. You're going to change. Just because this won't work now doesn't mean it won't work ever. Try to find a way to come at it at a slant. And so I filed it in my mind and I kept Huey there. He was still very dear to me. And it occurred to me as society was moving on that there were a lot of questions about speech, about what it meant. As a younger adult, I remembered thinking, what does this mean for my associations of the Wizard of Oz? What does it mean for the fact that it has been ever present in my childhood? Who am I as a tribally enrolled citizen to have had little iconic figures of characters created by someone who wished me death, who wished me to have never been born? That's heavy loaded stuff. But then how do you unpack that for kids? And at what age do you unpack it for kids? And how do you be mindful of who they are, what their vulnerabilities may be, how to best care for them as they're navigating these tough revelations and situations. You know, our goal is never to traumatize the children. Our goal is to give them truth in a way that they can process it so that they eventually can take a leadership position in the society and we all move forward and do better, right? Mm-hmm. Giving Huey a big sister who was a young journalist, was also grappling with questions of speech, provided a little bit of that slant I was looking for. It gave an older voice to contextualize what was happening, and also it gave him a support system. I purposely made the Wolf family to be tremendously loving and healthy in a way that many of my family members are and raise their children, because that isn't a reality that we see often reflected in the popular media when it comes to Native people. And all of those forces just came together in the sort of glow of the We Need Diverse Books movement, for which I am tremendously grateful, the nonprofit organization. I thought to myself, maybe now we can do this. I can move forward. I can contextualize it in a way that works for a span of teen readers. Maybe they can grow into that story. And also I can go bigger with some of these First Amendment and personal choice questions. You know, just because we can say something doesn't mean that we should. How do we separate the speaker from the speech? What is the role of political speech, journalistic speech, speech associated with our faith? There's a lot to it. And these are big questions that kids and grown-ups are wrestling with all the time.
Mm-hmm. And you covered so much in 286 pages to really have us thinking about all the stuff that you just said. So well done.
Thank you. I'm honored. I've had some really interesting conversations with teens about it. I know that you don't, but I think in the general society, sometimes there's a tendency to underestimate young readers. And I have been so tremendously impressed with the depth of analysis and the thoughtful questions that have been presented to me, particularly in these pandemic times, through email and social media, where kids really want to dig in and they want to talk about it and figure out how it all works together and what is their role in the larger conversation.
Other questions for Cynthia?
I just have to say, I just love this book. I've read it twice now, and I probably won't be the last time. I just keep coming back to it and finding more little nuggets. When you talked about the heart of the family and all that, and you know, just the way that you intentionally built the family out, when we were talking before you jumped on, I questioned, you know, I wonder if she was intentional about choosing Huey to be the Tin Man, because the Tin Man is all about heart, you know, and I thought, oh, that's perfect for him because that's him, you know. So I would love to hear more about how you kind of picked out that for him.
The Tin Man was the working title of the first manuscript that I tried to write. And it became Hearts Unbroken as a nod to a quote from the film version, which it goes something to the fact of hearts will never be practical until they can be made unbreakable. And so even though this is a character and a family who are faced with challenges, that doesn't mean that in the end, they aren't whole and loving. So that is kind of how it manifested. One of the most interesting aspects of it for me was how to frame the character of Mrs. Plaley. I think that one of the things that we often see in story and in popular conversations in society is this really binary take on too many things. There really are no binaries in the world. Everything is fluid to some degree. And so when we're looking at, you know, someone who is a teacher, she comes in, she wants to do this color conscious casting. She wants to open it up. She wants to shake things up and defy the expectations and give hope to the kids who are like, I will be playing the tree again, you know, so that yes, the spotlight can shine on you too. At the same time, you know, she has this kid here who is coming to her conversation, which is just bursting with, you know, good intentions and is doing legitimately good, important things with a totally different take on it that is also legitimate, is also heartfelt, is also having a real impact on his life, his emotional processing, his ability to participate fully in the art. So I wanted to create a space for grown-ups who are also reading and in dialogue with young adults who are reading to, if they didn't know where they fit, see themselves somewhere along a continuum. You don't have to be coming to it like Huey's mom, who is, an Indigenous law student and steeped in the battle for justice and positive change. You don't have to come to it as the villain. There's this whole range of center space where the vast majority of us are trying to find ourselves and stake a moral center that is not only sort of good intrinsically, but also works for the particular kids in a particular situation at a particular time, with the understanding that they are constantly evolving too. Mm-hmm. So all of those things came into consideration. I will admit that I was not a theater kid, but I desperately longed to be. If I could do it all over again, that is a choice that I would have made. In fact, our big theater star in my high school was Paul Rudd, who is now Ant-Man, the Avenger. So, we had an excellent high school theater department. And just those memories of those kids and how much they loved each other, that was a big part of the inspiration too.
I'm curious. I know that you said you had given some credit to your high school journalism teacher for the foundation that you had, being a former high school journalism student and newspaper teacher and sponsor for journalism. I want to know about your experiences, because even back when I was a newspaper sponsor, it was like still in print, but you had such insight into like this, how this would be like a digital version. And we were saying earlier that like for high school kids, it was a very professional paper. So yes. Would you tell us about that?
I did have to update my knowledge of high school newsrooms. There are definitely ones like this, even in Kansas. When I was working on the book, a big story was broke, a national story was broke by high school newspaper staff. I think they were from Manhattan, Kansas. And it was about state financing, and it was very sophisticated. I was wowed by them. But yes, I grew up in the age of light boards and X-Acto knives. I think I always had one of those things in my purse. I don't know how I could even move through the society today. I could never get on an airplane. I always had one. So I was doing a lot of research. I was talking to people who do that sort of thing. And I was blessed in that my now husband, who was in part an inspiration for writing the novel, is a photojournalist and did a number of, as a professional at the Baltimore Sun, did a number of programs at colleges with kids who are in high school now. And so was able to fill in some of those gaps and also point me to people who are really active in high school journalism today.
Love Miss Wilson.
So my question, Cynthia, for you is, have you always wanted to be a writer? If you have always written, how can we encourage our BIPOC students and all students really to wrestle with those difficult things and I love how you have, and you mentioned in an interview, flawed characters. So how can we encourage, is that something that you always liked, and how can we encourage our students to do the same?
First, you're doing clearly all the right things. You're engaged, you're talking about literature, you're bringing passion to it. Kids learn so much about what they should care about, by what the grown-ups around them care about, even if they're not necessarily showing you that is what is going on. So I think that is part of it. But beyond that, the thing that I always tell teens is that they're the heroes of their own life stories. They are writing their day. They are writing their moment. They are natural born storytellers. When they have an experience, maybe they come home from somewhere or they log off and their parent or grandparent, whoever their caregiver is, says, so how was your day? They will go through the elements of story. They will list the characters. They will list the setting. They will list the plot. They will focus on conflict. And they will talk about what the struggle is and the resolution. They do that all the time. They do it with us. They do it with each other. They just don't necessarily give themselves credit for doing it or realize that those are transferable skills. So I think that's part of it. And I also think, something that we can emphasize to them is that everything is a work in progress. There's so much pressure to do the right, choice with every word. We're in a situation now where what good writing is can be sometimes standardized even by bureaucracies, and voices vary. My structure in writing is often extremely indigenous. And that means that my storytelling may be more anecdotal. It may be less that driving arrow from scene to scene and more circular in certain ways. So if we can give them permission to use the voices that they have in a way that feels true to who they are and the song in their heart, I think that that will help liberate them and create a safe space for them to sort of shrug off some of those bigger expectations and just play with it. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect. Yes, your voice is valid. And this is a place that you're not necessarily going to be judged by the standard of everyone else. We're not going to hold up this mythical being and say, this is what good looks like. We will say, this is a circle of story. It's happened since people first gathered around fires. It is your inheritance. You belong here.
I love that.
Love that. I was going to ask, so at the end of the book, I kept kind of wondering, like, what is Huey and Louise going to do next? And what is their life going to be in the future? So if you could have a crystal ball and 10, 15 years after high school, where can you see Huey and Louise? What do you think they would be doing as an adult?
Oh my gosh, 10, 15 years? I was doing good to get them through Huey's first semester of his sophomore year. He just finished a draft and did that. I think that Huey might become both someone who is on stage and behind the production. That, you know, he's a kid who can make a hard choice. That is a hard thing to do. I mean, what he does, you know, being there to support his friends, but saying this isn't where my voice belongs, that was tough. It took a lot of courage. And it wasn't, you know, something that fell into this category or that category very neatly. We need those storytellers. And I think thinkers like that will go forward. Louise is a lot. I love Louise. She has a lot of energy. I definitely can see her going into journalism and maybe even into higher education beyond that. But, you know, she's also the most quasi-autobiographical character that I have written, although I was in no way as confident, sophisticated, or especially with voice. I was a giant nerd, but I was definitely a journalist kid.
That's great. So you are working on a sequel.
I'm working on what we call a companion book. Usually when we say sequel, we mean the same protagonist and it takes place quickly after. This is a book that is centered on Huey. Louise is a secondary character in the way that he was a secondary character in her book. And for those who are very much tapped into different age and reading levels, it's for slightly younger teens. It takes place during Huey's sophomore year. And so in the continuum of YA, it is not a 10 and up like Rain, which centered on their cousin, although Rain is also a secondary character in the book. And it is not what we call more 14 and up or crossover upper level YA like Hearts Unbroken. Dun, dun. This is right there in that classic 12 and up slot. So it can fit very nicely in middle school. 6th graders can read it, 12th graders can read it. It has some more flow to it in that way.
Cannot wait, Cynthia, to read that. Love reading Hearts Unbroken, and so happy to know that Huey's story is going to continue. So we certainly will be picking up that copy. So thank you so much for joining us.
Madonna, thank you. It's been an honor.
Awesome. To stay up to date with Cynthia's work, please visit her website, cynthialeitichsmith.com. You can also follow her on Twitter at CynLeidichSmith. When we return, we'll discuss some instructional strategies if you want to teach Hearts Unbroken with your students. We'll be right back. We are back on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club, and now we're going to discuss some instructional strategies if you want to teach Hearts Unbroken by Cynthia Leitich Smith. Make sure that with every single book, you want to make sure you read the book before you decide that you're going to read it with your students, just so that you know about all the content and you're prepared for what discussions may take place. We want to make sure we share that with all of our viewers. So what are some ideas that you all may have regarding this book. I know one of them is certainly there's a lot of conversations about newspapers and journalism. So as many journalists as we can put in front of our students, either face to face or virtually, would be great. Giving them a chance to interact with reporters and photojournalists and editors. I mean, there's so many different roles that you can do within journalism, and they were really highlighted well in this book, I think.
And talking about all the considerations, all the things that you have to think about when you, one, go into a story, and as you're putting it together and writing it, making, your sources. And I think there was one time where would come back with a source, but they wanted to remain anonymous. And they're like, we can't do that because you don't have any credibility here. So I think just highlighting that is important to students who are writing or have thoughts about being in journalism.
Well, and I know we alluded earlier in our conversation to the separating the art from the artist. I immediately wanted to have a Socratic seminar about this with my kids, and I'm only K-5, so I wouldn't do this book with my babies, but I could see my high school daughter having some great discussion with her peers about those kinds of things. I thought about J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter. It immediately popped into my mind, and I thought the kids could take that and run with it and make cases for both sides. I really could see that.
It's it's a real situation that we're dealing with right now. I mean, we constantly, as people are called to the carpet for things that they say and do, we're going to continue to have to reevaluate how do we move forward with the person versus the art that they have put out into the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and how that the art or the work has held up over time in relevance, with changes in society, changes in language and use, mm-hmm. is, the merit of the work. Is it worthy of being teachable in those moments to pursue it? Or is this something that doesn't hold up? Like, this doesn't have meaning now, or, it's just not impactful anymore in a positive way.
I keep hearing I believe the Maya Angelou quote, when you know better, do better. Like, so much of that book came with this. So what I love about this book is there's so many different struggles mm-hmm. with a whole bunch of different characters. And I think there's something that every reader could somehow see themselves or see their experience as one of the characters. And when I was reading about how they were doing the words, but the casting was based, on ability, not on skin color. It, of course, made me think of Hamilton, because that was such a breakthrough in doing that. And I would love to see some kind of project at a high school level. I think you could do this quite well, and have the students pick a struggle that's personal to them. And I think it could be a project where maybe it was only shared between the person and the teacher. If they feel comfortable, they could share it with other people, but leave it like, do you want to write a journal article? Like, because they talk so much about journalism. Do you want to do a photojournalism thing? Would you like to create a lyrics for a song? Would you like to write a song? Would you like to rap it? Would you like to create music for it? Would you like to do interpretive dance to whatever your struggle is? There's so many struggles, and there's so many different ways that fear was used, that there's so many different ways that students could find one thing in this book that really resonated with them and build a project off of that.
My ELA teacher self was just thinking about hitting the standards on this one, but it's a great book for, I think, character analysis and the character development, because there's a lot of development through Louise, and then of course Huey, and then also just the different themes that are prevalent throughout it, the willful ignorance part, but then also the social emotional learning piece that I think all schools are trying to gear more to. I think that this is so relatable for high school students. So like you said, you could bring out those topics and have them talk about their own personal experiences that they've had with those same struggles.
I think there are a lot of historical events that are touched upon or mentioned, but not really expanded on or kind of given the background that students might need to understand why it's relevant and important. And throughout, every time she mentioned like the Trail of Tears, years ago, there is a North Carolina author who lives out in Cherokee. Nancy McIntosh Pafford is her name, and she wrote a book called White Feather. And I think that would be such a great companion novel. And it is about a young girl's experience, a young Cherokee girl's experience when her family, is to go on the Trail of Tears. And I think that would give some context and maybe some understanding as to the plight of the Native American people and why Lou is so upset, because I don't think some of our kids are going to get that just from the book. Like, why does this bother her so much? Because they don't know those things.
Yeah, I could definitely see some good collaboration with your social studies team, your US history teachers doing some sort of collaborative project. That would be very rich because they don't know a lot about some of these events. You're exactly right.
I think also too, this book,
included in the standards.
Yes. And I think we use safe space a lot, but I think this is more of a brave space opportunity where I think I can just leave it there. There's so much in this book that is a struggle. And I mentioned earlier in our chat, like, made me uncomfortable that I didn't understand it ahead of time. And it'd be a really neat discussions I think you could really have with students if they're willing to be that brave and share what's inside.
I could see having some powerful writing opportunities too, with looking at all these awesome secondary characters that you may have gotten a taste of, and I just wanted more. Like, I think about journaling from Chelsea's perspective as Dorothy. Oh my gosh, her experience is so rich and valid and so much to unpack there, and we didn't get to hear a lot of her story. Or Lou's mom, I could really see each kid getting their own character and digging through that and kind of pulling out some pieces that maybe they didn't have time to expand on because there was 50 bazillion characters, but they were all so good.
There were a lot of characters in this book. That is so true. And you had a lot of representation in the book. There was really, when you just kind of look at the characters, you had so many different, because I can't remember who it was that was in a wheelchair. Who was that?
The newspaper staff.
Yes,
Was it
he was on this episode. Nick was in this, and I didn't realize that until like later on in the book. It was mentioned something about his wheelchair, and I thought there are a lot of different types of people represented in this book. And it's not made a big deal. Oh, Nick in a wheelchair. That wasn't discussed from the beginning. It was just a mention of his wheelchair later, well into the book, when you had already learned other things about him. So I thought that was really great. I also think, while we're talking about newspaper, too, really important to have conversations with kids around news versus editorials. And I'm glad that was mentioned, because now so much people don't understand what's fact and what's fiction. And we have so much misinformation and so much fake news that we really have to continue to have conversations with kids about what's opinion and what's actually just unbiased news and truth and information.
Well, I like too that Cynthia kind of touched on it, not just being a binary, like everybody kind of puts things into this or that, and how it was such a spectrum in her story with everything. I could totally see someone taking that and doing a podcast series with it, having a group do that, because you could really have a lot of rich conversations about different binaries and how it's not a this or that.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Other ideas?
Going along with what you were saying earlier, Marlo, and I think Amy too, about all of the different characters. There were so many different characters, and some of the characters weren't there a lot, or they were only mentioned, but their presence in the story was meaningful. Like, it had purpose and it had an impact. And I don't think there were any characters that were just kind of like background props. I mean, they all had something to say. And I really think you could expand that, like taking the characters, not only looking at them, but talking about like, what was their impact? Like, what is that character's purpose in the story?
Mm-hmm.
And how could, really, and then maybe expand on that and do their own little story from that character.
Yeah, that's great. How does it really drive the narrative? Because those little nuggets gave you little bits of pieces of information. Who was the character that went into that closet down in the basement with Lou and gave her the book? What was her name? I can't think of her name.
Library assistant, and I can't think of her name either.
She was a library assistant.
Yes.
I thought I had her name
She was funny.
somewhere. But I thought what one of her purposes was regarding, her parents thought a certain way, but she had a different point of view. So I
Undercover
actually went.
agent
She's
or
called
double
herself a
agent.
double agent, yeah. And so I went and looked up, regarding kids following their parents' political affiliation, or even following their parents' thoughts in terms of racism and those types of things. And there were some great studies about that. And so, in that short amount of time that she was in the story, it sent me on doing some research to start looking at some other things in terms of how sometimes children have differing opinions from their parents, and how they're navigating and thinking through the world on their own terms. So you're right, every character brought something to the table.
You could really take that, Marlo, and put her up against Peter
Mm-hmm.
and his parents, because I had hopes for him at the beginning. I did not think that's who he was. And just kind of compare how the two have just interacted or reacted to their parents' viewpoints so differently.
That's true. I was so disappointed in Peter. I mean, and what I thought was interesting too, he was the one who held the stereotypes around indigenous people and alcohol, and he was the one in the neighborhood drunk. So I thought that was really telling why you have these opinions, that you need to stop with the stereotypes. But you're absolutely right about that, Pam.
I wonder if you could almost take, and again, I'm elementary, so it's hard for me sometimes to think in a high school education world, but I feel like with the boyfriend, girlfriends, things that you have going on, but talking about communication and how that plays out, I could see high schoolers, guys and girls, like talking about the book, debating over, well, the boys did this and the girls did this, and Cam reacted like this and Joey reacted like that. And it makes me wonder if you could have some sort of discussion about effectively communicating and how that plays out in your relationships.
Definitely when she broke up with him by email.
By email,
and kind of that lack of communication. And then when Joey got mad and just stopped talking, and that whole lack of communication. And yeah, definitely delve into that and how to do better.
Right. He was so upset about that. Cam was
he
really, really
ghosted
hurt
her.
about that. Yeah, Joey certainly did. The media coordinator, I mean, not media coordinator, media sister, her name was Brooke. That was her name, Brooke. But a lot of different things, really interesting story. I'm glad that we had a chance to read Hearts Unbroken by Cynthia Leitich Smith. So if you want to read a really great book that's going to cause you to think, you have a lot of great discussions, you might want to pick up a copy. I want to thank everybody so much for watching this month's episode of the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club. Join us next month. We're going to read Starfish by Lisa Phipps, and we're really excited about Starfish. So join us next month for another great conversation. We'll see you next time on the Tar Heel Teachers Book Club.